Answers to media questions. Question: would you comment on a statement by German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock that Russia is the biggest threat in Europe? Maria Zakharova: first, it is a cliché used in many NATO documents. Second, we are not surprised by yet another anti-Russia statement made by German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, who is poorly educated and doesn't know much about international affairs and even German history. I would recommend her to read over the materials of the Nuremberg trials. So far, it looks as if she draws inspiration from the practice of the Third Reich's propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, who believed that a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. Why is she doing this? It has become a norm for Annalena Baerbock to make unbelievably stupid statements. We are sorry for the people of Germany who have such a foreign minister. It is more than just a matter of feeling sorry or feeling embarrassment or sympathy, because her statements are damaging the people of Germany. It is notable that the idea of the Russian threat has been formalized in the national security strategy of modern Germany. The German authorities, using the services of Annalena Baerbock and other politicians, are regularly and deliberately manipulating public opinion. I don't know if they are doing this on Washington's orders, or because they don't know their own history, or worse still, it is a frightful thought, but there are numerous facts proving it, because they draw inspiration in the most horrible periods in their history, including the Third Reich. A part of this new mentality is the recent decision to deploy US long-range systems in Germany. As for the facts, our only concern is to prevent threats to Russia from the West. We would like to think that German politicians, including even Annalena Baerbock, will see that their anti-Russia policy is misguided, counterproductive and dangerous to Germany. Question: the other day, Germany's Ursula von der Leyen, notorious for her bellicose anti-Russian views, was re-elected to the presidency of the European Commission, the main EU body. What are your thoughts on the EU's future development and its position in the multipolar world order? Maria Zakharova, the permanent mission of Russia to the European Union, has already commented on this tragic page in the history of Western Europe. I invite you to read the comments, 1-2, dated July 18 of this year. In summary, I can only say that, regrettably, we should not expect anything good from Ms von der Leyen's confrontational approach, neither for the stability and well-being of the EU member countries, nor for democracy, freedom and security in this part of the world. It is well known that the former defense minister of Germany is a convinced advocate of policies designed to maximize US control over Europe and the main proponent of a Russophobic agenda in the EU. This aligns with her calls to invest increasingly more in EU defense and security and create a defense alliance, which implies further subordination to NATO and support for the Nazi regime in Ukraine. Pursuing these objectives is bleeding the EU white. Its prospects are vague as well. As a result, the EU has no time to consider the desires of its citizens or define its own geopolitical interests, aims and objectives, as distinct from those imposed from overseas. In a situation where the EU is rapidly becoming militarist and puts its economy on a war footing, it will continue its slide into a political and economic decline. The figures and dynamics speak for themselves. The European Commission will insist that member countries show absolute obedience and increase their defense spending to benefit the US military-industrial complex. We are witnessing an attempt to take control of the EU's entire defense industry, which poses a risk of prolonged confrontation for the European region. As the current EU leaders create an alternative reality on orders from Washington, they are seeking to keep EU residents in constant fear of a non-existent, imaginary threat from the East. This argument is also used to enforce strict Euro-Atlantic discipline among EU and NATO member countries and popularize the idea that the European Commission needs increased powers, an idea promulgated in order to further restrict the sovereignty of European states. What does the threat from the East mean? What exactly do the Brussels officials mean by that? Are they referring to Russia? Our country has dedicated years to implementing various infrastructure projects in order to deliver energy resources to consumers in Western Europe. It is difficult to understand how Russia's own investment in those mutually beneficial projects can be considered a threat. Speaking about China, it is clear that the PRC is doing everything it can to foster cooperation despite the anti-Chinese sentiments in Western Europe, and actively striving to keep markets open, which meets their interests. Historically, it has been the West that has always regarded the East as its domain and a testing ground for geopolitical experiments. Look at the number of wars that have been brought by the West to our country over the centuries. Recall the Western attempts to subdue China, which Western countries have always regarded as their semi-colony. What specific threat from the East is Brussels referring to? We would like to have the facts. As a result, the EU is left without equality, freedom of opinion, and the right to choose its own development path. It is using all its resources to oppose Russia and the East as a whole, which, according to European officials, includes Russia as a prime component. The cancel non-culture is immediately activated with regard to those who deviate from this paradigm. They are cut off from audiences, denied access to microphones and screens, and subjected to political pressure, boycotts, financial blackmail, and smear campaigns. Everything is fair game for Brussels. Ideology-driven, authoritarian, and dictatorial administrative methods are gaining prominence in the EU today. Regrettably, they will become even tougher following Ursula von der Leyen's second coming and the establishment of the police and censorship bodies she has proposed. Question: French Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin recently stated in an interview with a local newspaper that Paris had refused to accredit certain Russian journalists for covering the Olympic Games, fearing potential spies. How would you comment on these statements? Maria Zakharova: It is truly paranoid to exclude certain journalists from attending events where thousands of their colleagues are present. In this case, Paris is following the example set by Washington. Let me give you an example. Several years ago, a delegation led by Sergei Lavrov visited the White House for talks. Several photojournalists, including a Russian photographer, were invited to cover the talks. Our correspondent had worked at a news agency for many years in this capacity, and anyone can access his photos. However, 2 days later, the US deep state launched a campaign involving media outlets and the social media, accusing the photographer of being a Russian spy. They claimed he had brought secret equipment to the talks, perhaps the death ray of engineer Garin, and was attempting to gather intelligence in the Oval Office. This is nothing but paranoia. There are two possible explanations for the French government's attitude towards the issue of ejecting the Russian media. First, the Élysée Palace and the numerous French officials who have claimed to support freedom of speech, human rights, and the safety of journalists are being hypocritical. We remember the numerous events and summits held to discuss these issues. We have not forgotten how Paris pretended to spearhead the movement for upholding freedom of speech, protecting journalists, and journalism. In reality, everything proved completely different. Although Russian journalists were invited to official events, they were being prevented from attending them. The French media baited them and conducted information campaigns to discredit them. Russian media outlets broadcasting in France faced harassment and pressure. This shows that Paris sees its obligations, to which it is seemingly committed, as null and void. The second aspect is Russophobia and the nationalist attitude towards representatives of various states. Western Europe has repeatedly traveled down this dark road before. In the 1930s, for example, journalists, publishing houses, and media outlets were segregated along ethnic lines. Question: President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev said that the peace treaty with Armenia has been 80 to 90% approved. What is Moscow's opinion on the progress in the talks between the parties? Is Russia ready to provide a platform for signing if they reach an agreement? Maria Zakharova: I would like to note that the statement by the leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia of October 31, 2022, specifically stressed the importance of active preparation for signing a peace treaty between the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Republic of Armenia in order to achieve a stable and long-term peace in the region. It was also at that time that the parties agreed to continue searching for mutually beneficial solutions based on the existing prerequisites, while the Russian Federation committed to providing all necessary assistance. Our approach is not only consistent but is also recorded in this document, signed by the President of Russia. It goes without saying that the scope and forms of such assistance must be acceptable to each party. In keeping with the agreements reached so far, Moscow has repeatedly hosted rounds of Azerbaijan-Armenia talks on drafting the peace treaty. I want to stress that we are ready to continue hosting the talks. We guarantee the creation of as comfortable conditions as possible for both delegations in a bilateral format of their choosing. We also welcome the efforts of our Kazakhstani partners, who initiated and organized a productive meeting between the foreign ministers of Azerbaijan and Armenia on May 10 to 11 in Almaty. We consider the conclusion of a balanced peace treaty between our allies as an indispensable condition for building an architecture of indivisible security in the region, as well as for steady socio-economic development. We hope that the parties will soon overcome any remaining disagreements and make progress on other aspects of normalizing Azerbaijan-Armenia relations in line with the trilateral agreements at the highest level. The destiny and future of the South Caucasus should be determined solely by the countries in the region and their neighboring partner countries. Nobody from outside can bring peace and prosperity to our common home. Question: During his last visit to Ukraine, UN High Commissioner for Refugees Filippo Grandi expressed solidarity with the victims of daily attacks by Russia and claimed that the Okamat Children's Hospital had been struck on July 8. Could you comment on these statements? Maria Zakharova: Indeed, we have taken note of a press release by the UNHCR and Filippo Grandi's statements posted on social media about his recent visit to Ukraine and the Okamat Hospital. We would like to clarify once again that on July 8, the Children's Hospital was struck by a Ukrainian anti-aircraft defense missile launched by a Norwegian NASAMS system. 2 people were killed and about 20 sustained injuries of different severity. However, the Western community and the UN representatives who have joined their ranks turn a blind eye to the fact that Ukraine's anti-aircraft defense systems are deliberately installed in close proximity to residential buildings and social infrastructure in violation of international humanitarian law, which prohibits using civilian facilities for military purposes. Does the UN High Commissioner for Refugees know this? I hope that he is familiar with international law. It is also regrettable that we see double standards being applied. Allow me to remind you that when the Al-Ali Hospital in Gaza was attacked on October 17, 2023, resulting, according to different sources, in the deaths of 500 people and injuries to hundreds, we did not hear any clear and definitive positions from the collective West on who carried out the attack and why. We did not hear anything from the UN Secretariat or competent UN bodies. We call on the UNHCR to adhere to the generally recognized humanitarian standards and the principles of neutrality, humanity, impartiality, and independence, as prescribed by its mandate. It is how this office is supposed to operate. Question: On July 22, the Chinese Foreign Ministry released its No First Use of Nuclear Weapons Initiative working paper. What is your assessment of its contents and the document's significance at this stage? In addition, according to Japanese media reports, the United States will include using its nuclear weapons to protect Japan in their first joint document on extended deterrence. How will Russia respond to this? Maria Zakharova: We would like to reiterate that Russia and China, as strategic partners, always show respect and consideration for each other's initiatives. This level of partnership between our countries enables a systematic, effective, and trust-based dialogue on international security issues. We also closely coordinate our approaches to a wide range of relevant issues. The mutual focus on deepening bilateral ties, defined as a comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation, was reaffirmed during the meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping in May 2024. Regarding the substance of the issue, the initiative put forward by our Chinese partners is one of those ideas that should be considered in the broader military and political context and in conjunction with other significant factors affecting international security and strategic stability. This comprehensive approach is warranted by the continuing deterioration of the global situation, including the rapidly mounting tensions between nuclear weapon states. We are guided by these considerations when assessing and discussing any initiatives aiming to reduce nuclear danger, regardless of the platform they are being promoted on. For our part, we give unconditional priority to any measures that would actually be instrumental in reducing the confrontational potential between nuclear weapon states by eliminating fundamental security disagreements between them. Regarding the reports in the Japanese media that you have mentioned, we do not currently have specific comments on the subject. Question: U.S. President Biden has withdrawn from the presidential race, endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris as his replacement. Which candidate would be more favorable for Russia, Kamala Harris or her Republican rival Donald Trump? The U.S. constantly accuses Russia of trying to interfere in the elections. How would you comment on these attacks? Maria Zakharova, thank you for your trust. The United States is in a predicament where all we can do is hope they will survive this year without the situation spiraling out of control. It is a thankless job to comment on the vicissitudes of the U.S. presidential campaign. The recent developments in the U.S. have been anything but democratic. Suffice it to mention the attempt on Donald Trump's life or the ongoing racket over a lack of transparency in President Biden's decision to withdraw from the race, opening the door to Kamala Harris, clearly under pressure from the vice president's entourage. This speaks volumes about the vaunted American democracy. Whatever the dramatic plot twists in the U.S. elections, and believe me, there will be drama, given the deep divisions in society and a very real civic conflict, Russophobia and the perception of Russia as an existential enemy of the United States are woven into its doctrinal documents. From this perspective, it is essential that we harbor no illusions about the characters of the American political theater that you mentioned. And that is just how we perceive them. Naturally, political infighting and squabbles among the ruling elites in the United States are good because at least they force America to focus on its own snowballing problems, instead of pursuing exterritorial schemes. Blaming Russia for its own mistakes, problems, and troubles are symptomatic of the disease plaguing American democracy. We wish it a speedy recovery. We reaffirm that we never interfere in the internal affairs of sovereign states, nor do we manipulate or influence electoral processes. The upcoming elections in the United States are no exception. We have never interfered, we are not interfering, and we do not intend to interfere in the future, unlike the United States, which cannot resist meddling in other countries' internal affairs, or, to put it simply, sticking its nose where it doesn't belong. It would be beneficial if they put an end to this and concentrated on addressing their own numerous problems, which the American people are now beginning to see. Question: the European Union foreign ministers have decided to provide military assistance to Armenia worth €10 million. How would you comment on this decision to allocate military aid to Armenia while the peace process with Azerbaijan is ongoing? Maria Zakharova, we have repeatedly pointed out that the EU has lost its peaceful foundation. It lacks the potential for peace that it could tap into. Perhaps there is something left in the depths, but we don't see anything that could be brought into working condition and applied. There were times when the European Union, at least in words, strived for a peaceful, stable environment and tried to strengthen it through negotiations. Now it is clear what is happening, what decisions are being made, and what documents are being signed. The European Union has taken a course towards militarization and confrontation, serving the interests of the United States and NATO. Our warnings have turned out to be justified. The entire Western Company is working to impose widespread confrontation and turn the post-Soviet space into an arena of geopolitical confrontation. Statements made yesterday by representatives of the U.S. Congress, suggesting that efforts should be organized in the post-Soviet space to prevent good relations between Central Asian countries and Russia, speak volumes. The European Union's aim to exacerbate existing contradictions, including between Baku and Yerevan, aligns with their objectives of containing Russia and other nations that pursue sovereign policies independent of the West. How can the collective West tolerate the possibility of one fewer conflict zone on the map? How can they accept the idea of another region of instability becoming more stable, marked by peace, security, cooperation, humanitarian ties, mutual benefit, and mutual respect? This would mean fewer opportunities for the West to fish in troubled waters, which is not in their interest. The European Union's plan to send €10 million to support Armenia's armed forces is undoubtedly driven by geopolitical ambitions to extend its destabilizing influence in the South Caucasus. We are sure that there is no need to explain anything to anyone. The example of Ukraine clearly illustrates that the European Peace Facility is not about peace, stability, or security, but rather about war, provocation, and bloodshed. Such Western approaches, based on the principles of divide and rule and push and play off, and flooding the South Caucasus with weapons, will not bring any benefits to the region's security and stability. Question: the Second Global Media Forum on Exposing False Information, Combating Disinformation took place in Shusha, Azerbaijan, with notable political scientists and journalists from Russia in attendance. How effective do you think such dialogues between the media and experts are in addressing misinformation? Are there any plans to organize a similar high-profile international event in Russia? Maria Zakharova: Russia hosts numerous international and regional forums. While their titles may not explicitly use terms like anti-fake or combating disinformation, these topics have long been integral to their agendas. It would be redundant to replicate the exact names of other events, as the substance of these issues is already well represented in our discussions. Similar sessions were held at the SPIEF 2024, and the topic is frequently addressed at the Eastern Economic Forum as well. Numerous meetings between our country's leadership and the media are dedicated to discussing these issues. Additionally, specialized platforms like the Caspian Media Forum have consistently prioritized this subject. Our country regularly hosts both regular and special events where these discussions are a key focus. This issue is crucial as it represents a significant challenge for all of humanity today. New technologies, such as deepfakes, are emerging from the use of artificial intelligence and lack of both international legal regulation and sometimes even national legislation. These technologies can cause confusion and lead people to make misguided decisions that could escalate conflict potential. Addressing these concerns demands not only ongoing monitoring and discussions on reputable international platforms but also a thorough examination of the latest innovations in this field. Question: you have already commented on this issue, but perhaps you can add something. The EU will provide Armenia with €10 million from the European Peace Facility to enhance the material and technical capabilities of the Armenian armed forces. What is Moscow's opinion on Western military activities in the South Caucasus? Maria Zakharova: one might wonder what can be achieved in terms of boosting defense capabilities with €10 million in this complex region that has seen multiple large-scale conflicts. It is the prerogative of a sovereign state to decide how to implement its policies and defense projects, as well as where to obtain funding. We have concerns about certain issues that are linked with our country. The so-called European Peace Facility, as it is officially known, is not actually promoting peace. In reality, this war fund sponsors hostilities and the escalation of conflicts. If you tell me and your audience that the Peace Fund has accomplished something peaceful, and if you find evidence showing that the funding it provided facilitated a peace settlement, then we would acknowledge that, provided that such evidence exists. The problem is that there is none. All the money spent and allocated by them to support the Kiev regime has only served to fuel and escalate the conflict, further worsening the situation. This is widely known, and I believe that everyone is already aware of this. One can juggle with words and divert public attention from the actual situation, but this is unlikely to be effective, especially considering that the situation in Ukraine has exposed the truth to everyone. Question: NATO has put over 500,000 service personnel on red alert. Is open confrontation possible? Dmitry Peskov said the other day that NATO threatens Russia. Maria Zakharova: the 500,000 NATO service personnel have been put on red alert in accordance with decisions made at the 2023 NATO summit in Vilnius. I would like to emphasize that they were put on red alert a long time ago, and it is not related to any recent developments. On the contrary, this is now part of the standard NATO military doctrine. They have been on alert for over 12 months ago. Considering that the alliance has proclaimed Russia as the most significant and direct threat to the security of the Euro-Atlantic region, it is clear that we should take these military preparations seriously. I would like to remind you once again that Russia does not have any aggressive plans with regard to NATO. The problem is that the alliance perceives our defensive capabilities and security concerns as aggression. In fact, they would only be satisfied if Russia fully submitted to NATO's plans. As soon as Russia prioritizes its own national interests over NATO's plans, the alliance immediately sees this as a security threat. This is a philosophical issue. NATO is characterized by dualism, and it should deal with this dualism by itself. Question: several days ago, Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin issued instructions to open a new consulate general in Denpasar, Bali, Indonesia, which is extremely popular with Russian tourists. When will it start working? Maria Zakharova. On July 18, 2024, Prime Minister of Russia Mikhail Mishustin signed an instruction on opening a Russian consulate general in Denpasar, Republic of Indonesia. The Foreign Ministry is working to implement that instruction, in particular, to find premises for our new representative office abroad. Information about the start of its operation will be duly published on the Ministry's official internet resources. We are doing our best to implement that instruction. As you pointed out, this decision will serve the interests of our citizens who often travel to that tourist destination. Question: according to Russian ambassador to France Alexei Meshkov, Russian diplomats have not received access to the Olympic facilities in Paris. The Russian consular staff will be unable to provide assistance to Russian fans or athletes, who have been left unprotected, and Russia will be unable to help them in case of need. Isn't this a violation of international norms and rules? Maria Zakharova: in this particular case, Paris, France, and the International Olympic Committee have violated everything that could be violated. There are elements of open violation of the Olympic Charter and other documents regulating sports, including UN ones. There are also elements of open nationalism in the form of Russophobia, discrimination, and double standards. You can find all kinds of violations in the organization of the Olympic Games in Paris in the context of the Russophobic decisions. On the other hand, we would like to remind everyone that before traveling to France, Russian fans and tourists should carefully read information about the current situation in that country. Recommendations for our citizens are available on the website of the Russian Embassy in France. It is important to understand that there are serious risks to personal safety in France, meaning the high level of the terrorist threat, an unfavorable crime situation, and a large-scale anti-Russia campaign waged by the French authorities in the media. In case of emergencies, Russian citizens will be unable to use Russian bank cards, and there are numerous restrictions on the use of large amounts of cash in France. All this information is available in our recommendations. Of course, Russian diplomats in France will take all the necessary measures to protect the rights and interests of our citizens in case of accidents. In case of emergencies, our citizens will be able to contact the Russian diplomatic office by phoning round-the-clock emergency numbers. I would like to reiterate that people should carefully consider all the pros and cons before traveling to France, because Russian diplomats might be unable to quickly provide consular assistance to them because of restrictions on their movement around Paris. We urge Russian citizens and compatriots to remain alert and careful at all times, including in light of the Olympics organizers' discriminatory attitude to Russian athletes, journalists, and fans. Judging by the latest statements made by French officials, they see spies and Kremlin's agents of influence everywhere, as well as those who would like to wreck their wonderful Olympic event. It is all a lie, of course. We can see that the spy mania is gathering momentum and has reached the stage of a paranoia. At the same time, Russian citizens should remember that they voluntarily come within the jurisdiction of France when they enter it and must comply with its laws. This goes without saying. As per the Olympic Charter, responsibility for organizing the Olympic Games is entrusted to the National Olympic Committee of France and the authorities of the host city, that is, Paris. We hope that France will honor its obligations to create safe conditions for all visitors, fans, and tourists regardless of their citizenship. More specifically, we hope that it will stop violating them. Question: what was the Foreign Ministry's reaction to Kiev's statements about its readiness to resume a dialogue with Moscow? President Zelensky has also allowed for the possibility of talks with Russia, including with President Putin. Zelensky expects to have a new peace plan in autumn that Moscow would be willing to discuss. Maria Zakharova: first, we have no faith in him. No faith whatsoever. No faith at all. No one has. No one believes him. Everyone is well aware that he is a man who is capable of turning everything on its head, heap lies upon lies, and eventually abandon everything, considering that he has abandoned his own nation, throwing the Ukrainian people upon a sacrificial altar. Second, this might be a result of the pre-election situation in the United States. Just look at how he frantically tried to call Donald Trump after the assassination attempt, especially after a number of experts said that they did not rule out attempts by the Kiev regime's extremists to influence the US election. Third, this might be yet another attempt to promote the notorious peace formula that they are unsuccessfully trying to impose on everyone, hoping to involve as many countries as possible in its discussions based on false pretexts. Or perhaps it is a combination of all these factors. Our attitude is precisely this. There is nothing new in the intentions of the Kiev regime and its overseas sponsors to make up for the failed peace summit. We understand that these attempts will continue as they conceal the desire to impose Zelensky's feudal peace formula on a wide range of countries. Neither Zelensky and his administration, nor his overseas sponsors have taken any action to repeal the law prohibiting Ukraine from holding talks with Russia. So, what we are hearing are just words, many words that contradict what was said previously. But we see no action at all, except for the fact that Zelensky continues to make short work of his fellow Ukrainians. Question: the Georgian security services are investigating a plot to assassinate the leader of the ruling party. In light of this, the Federation Council of Russia has suggested that Georgia should join the CSTO and has promised to support the ruling party in Georgia in case of a coup attempt. What do you think is the likelihood of this scenario? Maria Zakharova: this might be a private opinion or an expert view. I cannot say that this is Russia's official position. Every state has the sovereign right to join international organizations based on their national interests and to ensure their security using their own capabilities. Given that security must be indivisible, we always emphasize that no one should ensure their security at the expense of the security of others. It is my duty to reiterate this point, since we are discussing this topic. It will undoubtedly be Georgia's sovereign right to make decisions of this nature and on such a scale. Question: on July 8, Japan and the Philippines signed a defense deal known as the Reciprocal Access Agreement, RA, which provides for deeper military cooperation between the two countries. Will this agreement affect the balance of forces within the US-Japan-Philippines triangle? Is there a risk that the Americans will use this agreement as a tool to tighten control over maritime trade routes and, as a consequence, impose new trade restrictions against China? Maria Zakharova: we observe a growing trend towards creating exclusive limited membership military blocs in the Asia-Pacific region. We have been pointing this out for a long time. Such trends are prompted by the West. They do not stem from the regional countries' aspirations, current or potential. These ideas are clearly brought in from the outside. Individual ASEAN countries are gradually being dragged into these groups, which originally comprised the United States and its Western allies. I don't know how best to put it. Either ASEAN countries are being drawn into these groups, or these groups are infiltrating the region. Maybe both would be correct. Such actions confirm once again that the creators of such selective formats could not care less about the future of cooperation within the ASEAN space or the association's goals and aspirations in the context of forming a security community working to ensure sustainable development in the region. At the same time, we are closely following Japan's progressive remilitarization pursued by the Kishida administration, including its policy to cater to Washington's strategy of consistently consolidating US-centric bloc initiatives of anti-Russia and anti-China orientation in Asia under the banner of the free and open Indo-Pacific concept. But how can it be free or open with military political blocs with command and administrative systems in place? Freedom, openness, and transparency are ruled out by the underlying concepts enshrined in the bloc's doctrinal documents. This irresponsible policy is propelling Tokyo towards a dangerous escalation of tensions in the Asia-Pacific region and thereby creating direct threats to the Russian Federation's security. We warn them about our countermeasures aimed at strengthening Russia's defense capabilities and protecting national sovereignty. The last such step was taken preemptively, and we take such steps on a regular basis, in connection with Japan's military exercise, which is now underway near our far eastern borders and which includes forces from extra-regional countries, NATO members. Regarding the expansion of military-industrial cooperation between Tokyo and Manila, we would like to note the following. If this is the Kishida administration's way of making humanity forget about the numerous crimes committed by the Japanese military before and during World War II, as part of its expansionist policy in Asia, including the Bataan Death March in the Philippines in 1942, such revisionist attempts are doomed to failure. Those events are well remembered not only by us, but also by the Filipino people. This was confirmed, among other things, by the participation of Philippine representatives in the international conference hosted by the Russian Foreign Ministry's Diplomatic Academy in 2022, Crimes of Militarist Japan, Historical and Modern Aspects. Once again, Tokyo needs to learn the lessons of Japan's defeat in World War II, to reflect on its aggressive rhetoric and foreign and domestic policies before World War II, and recall what it all led to. We call on Tokyo to fully acknowledge the outcomes of World War II, and to abandon plans for the total militarization of the country, because this ended in a disaster for Japan and the Japanese people once before, bringing sorrow and suffering on an unprecedented scale to the nation. Question: Prosecutor General Igor Krasnov has paid an official visit to the DPRK. Does this visit involve the Foreign Ministry's diplomats, and what is the bilateral agenda? Maria Zakharova, under Presidential Executive Order No. 1478 of November 8, 2011, the Foreign Ministry of the Russian Federation plays a coordinating role in implementing Russia's holistic foreign policy. The Foreign Ministry is the main entity in the system of federal executive agencies responsible for relations with foreign states and international organizations. It coordinates the activities of federal executive agencies in the sphere of international relations and international cooperation. Regarding practical aspects, the Foreign Ministry's staff always accompanies visits involving official Russian delegations to other countries. This does not mean that they accompany members of these delegations all the way. This implies the work of our headquarters, efforts to draft the relevant documents and to coordinate specific issues with the relevant agencies, as well as the work of our embassies to receive the delegations. On July 22, 2024, the Prosecutor General's office provided detailed comments on Russian Prosecutor General Igor Krasnov's working visit to Pyongyang and its agenda. They are posted on social media accounts of the Prosecutor General's office. Question: At one of your briefings, you suggested organizing a roundtable discussion on the events of 1991 and promised to take part in it. When will this discussion take place? Maria Zakharova: No, this is not so. I did not suggest organizing this discussion. I received a question. As far as I remember, it was about 1945, rather than 1991. Replying to this question, I said that they could organize a roundtable discussion, and that we would talk about various issues at this event. This is all. I did not suggest holding this discussion. I said that you can invite us if you want to. Do not distort specific statements and please use quotations. A proposal to act as an organizer was addressed to a representative of media outlets. We received no proposals during this period, and we will examine them if they are forthcoming. Question: People rallying outside the U.S. Embassy in Moscow demand that the nuclear doctrine be changed back, and nuclear missiles are targeted at U.S. cities again. Other demands are being made as well. Could you share with us whether such expressions of popular will have a bearing on the decision-making process? Maria Zakharova: They are certainly taken into account. People have had enough of it. We see it. People understand everything very well. This is not a public relations event that took place just because someone out there doesn't have anything better to do. Moscow has so much to offer and there's no need to come up with fancy ideas. People just had enough of it. People keep hearing aggressive rhetoric coming from official Washington. They see what the US politicians are doing. They understand perfectly well who is behind the Ukraine crisis. They see fabricated stories peddled by the Western media, because the information space is one today. Our audiences have access to the news that are broadcast overseas and in Western Europe. People are trying to express their opinions and to react to statements made by Washington, London, Paris, Berlin, and Brussels that allegedly this is not Russia's policy that relies on the principles of democracy and accurately captures the voice of the people, but Russian propaganda. People rally in front of embassies, not only the US Embassy, but embassies of other Western countries as well, on different occasions in order to, I think, back up with their lawful actions, which is important, and without resorting to unlawful actions, the messages conveyed by our country's officials. This was clearly reflected during the Russian presidential election campaign. The points that President Putin made were accepted and supported by our people. You have seen the figures. There are civil society initiatives as well. Some people engage in providing material and moral support to our frontline military. Others take care of the families that had their breadwinners and relatives go to the front line. Still others engage in civic activities and show empathy as they conduct humanitarian and charitable events. Some people consider it necessary to make their point of view known by the collective West and accuse it of outright complicity, in particular, of committing terrorist attacks, ratcheting up tensions, escalating the crisis, and militarizing Europe, by showing their indignation in front of embassies. We see the logic behind such rallies. We call on everyone and emphasize the importance of holding them exclusively within legal bounds and in compliance with regulations. We are committed to ensuring the security of diplomatic and consular buildings of foreign countries and want them to comply with the same requirements. At times, unfortunately, this is not enforced with regard to Russian diplomats by representatives of the collective West. To reiterate, we see perfectly well the logic behind such events and the logic that drives the people who organize such events. Question: Russia-related issues are making headlines in the Western media around the world every day and even every hour. I have a question in this regard. Where do the Western media get their information from? Does the Foreign Ministry deny them accreditation? Are they isolated from official information? How many Western correspondents are accredited with the Foreign Ministry? Why are they not present at official briefings? Are they not interested in Russia's official position? Are they deliberately avoiding opportunities to learn things about Russia's position? Perhaps, your answers scared them so much that they are now afraid to show up at briefings, let alone ask questions? Maria Zakharova: different journalists attend our briefings. Even today, we have here representatives from different countries and mass media, including those who sometimes feature in our website section with a fake stamp. Reporters like that attend our briefings as well. We are open to everyone. If someone is a journalist, a correspondent, and has an ID to prove that, or, if the issue is about a foreign correspondent, accreditation by the Foreign Ministry, or if he or she is a journalist in their own country, a reporter can join the briefing in any of the above cases. All they need to do is submit an application in advance, confirming their status as journalists and receive a link to the briefing. We are not segregating anyone. On the contrary, our goal is to provide exhaustive information. Sometimes it pains me to see or hear those who are constantly involved in unscrupulous interpretation of information and fake news. Sometimes, I need to get over it to make sure this information reaches the end user. With regard to the number of journalists accredited by the Foreign Ministry, over 100 media bureaus from unfriendly countries are accredited with the Foreign Ministry. We are talking solely about unfriendly countries and bureaus. That is, the issue is not about the number of correspondents, but the number of bureaus. We are not limiting them in their activities. They can join briefings and take part in news conferences organized by the Foreign Minister and his deputies. Notably, our information work is not limited to in-person or virtual briefings. Every day, we take dozens and even hundreds of questions and requests from media members, including from unfriendly countries. I'm aware that it's illegal for many of them to appear in the Russian government buildings in person, or they need to coordinate this with their higher authorities. Obviously, after 2022, they received a corresponding order, a directive, a narrative, as they say, to make it look as if they had left our information field. Remember the démarches and cheap shows staged by Bloomberg and many others. They said they were leaving the Russian Federation to make it look like they had left Russia for good. They all came back. Bloomberg is the only one who didn't. But Bloomberg did something more ingenious. This agency is located not far from our country. Having retained its Russian-speaking staff, it reaches out from abroad trying to find sources of information here, and have its questions answered. This cheap trick fell through, too. I repeat, we regularly receive questions from the Western media and respond to them. Among other things, we have a format of individual in-person, online and written interviews, in other words, a complete set of possibilities. Do I need to say anything more about this? I think not. You meet your colleagues, maybe you do not consider them colleagues after so many fakes, but one way or another, they formally remain journalists from unfriendly countries, during our online briefings.